I am Pamela D Wilson, caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. Welcome to the wrap-up segment of Care Bias, Cost, and Financial Planning. We are here to talk about the emotional and financial costs of care, many of which caregivers are not early involved with at such a stage that it becomes a conversation. We're talking about the importance of having these discussions early and the emotional effect and the hard costs of caregiving so that you know how to make the best plan for your elderly parents as possible. Let's move on with the normal housekeeping tasks. As you know, I use the term elderly parent, elderly parents, substitute that with who you are taking care of. The outline for the module is in the course materials. Print the slide handouts, participate in the slides, look for the ... so that you are with me and learning from the information presented. So let's talk about the objectives of the emotional and financial costs of care. At the end of the emotional and financial costs of care, you should be able to identify the emotional costs of care for working caregivers and compare them to the hard costs of care for elderly parents. By identifying costs of care, you should be able to formulate a plan for the transition to different levels of care services and how to manage when money for care runs out, which is inevitable for all of us. Let's talk about the costs of care. The costs of caring for elderly parents includes hard costs and the not so obvious costs. These are the emotional and personal costs. The obvious costs are costs that we write checks for. The costs of in-home care services, assisted living, care community type services, groceries, rent, prescriptions, health insurance, medical care, all of those expenses. You're writing a check or giving a credit card. The not so obvious costs are the personal costs of being a caregiver. The idea of caring for the caregiver has a lot of costs to emotional health and well-being from just daily life, juggling work and caring for elderly parents and your own families and yourself. There are personal costs related to the effect of spouses, your mom or dad, caring for spouses, and also, again, the adult children supporting elderly parents. If it were not for these family members, more elderly parents and loved ones would have no choice but to move early on to a care community or early on to nursing homes. Spouses and adult children keep elderly parents at home in many cases as long as possible until health makes it impossible to keep a parent at home or until money runs out. Moving an elderly parent to a nursing home, it's an emotional decision. Sometimes it can't be avoided. In this module, we will talk about many of the issues that result in stress for caregivers. I want to start with an issue often forgotten, which is caring for the caregiver from a financial perspective, which is rarely considered. It's urgent. Talk about it earlier. The idea of family support and caregiving for an elderly parent with dementia or any concerns brings up the idea of caring for the caregiver. Because most of the focus in families is given to caring for an elderly parent with dementia or other conditions, most of the money for care, no surprise, goes to the first person who becomes sick or the first person who needs care. Future care for the caregiver and the costs may be ignored. You may not even think about it. Little thought is given to having conversations about what happens to the caregiver, your mother or you. If and when you decide you decide to leave work to be a full-time caregiver, or you have conversations about the emotional and the physical effects on the health and well-being of a caregiver, you need care yourself. You have to go to the doctor. You have medical expenses as a result of being a caregiver, or after caregiving is done, how do you pay for your care? How do you pay for those financial costs? Caring for the caregiver should be included in conversations about caring at the time the first parent or the person needs care. More women than men, it is a proven statistic, do not have enough money for care after caring for a spouse or an elderly parent. Ask the question, what happens to your mother after your father receives care? What happens to your father after your mother receives care? Does money exist for care? Not thinking about caring for the caregiver will result in more concerns and more worry in the future, and it really does put caregivers at a disadvantage. Financial discussions, they might be uncomfortable. Have them anyway. Caregivers must think today about caring for the caregiver themselves when planning for the care needs of elderly parents and spouses. Caregivers, whether a spouse or an adult child, sacrifice their health and their well-being to be a caregiver. It is stressful, it is overwhelming, it is exhausting. Caring for elderly parents can open the door to having early care and financial discussions within your family and with yourself. While we all think we will be healthy forever and not need any care, the proof is in the situation in which we find ourselves when caring for elderly parents. You can see the writing on the wall. I can tell you, your elderly parents, they never thought about becoming ill. Most of them never thought about needing care. They never thought about having you be their caregiver. Juggling work and caregiving. Juggling work and caregiving have emotional costs for caregivers. Working caregivers juggle work and caregiving to care for elderly parents, spouses, and children. It's so easy to see why being a caregiver can feel exhausted and overwhelming when we work all day and caregive at night. If your mother or father is that main caregiver, you might notice mom or dad is wearing out and they need help. If you are the working caregiver, how many of you have rearranged your work schedule, changed your working hours, or taken unpaid leave to help elderly parents? Caregivers try to do it all without realizing the effect on daily life, health, and well-being, and without thinking of the future. A lot of caregivers will say to me, oh, I'll just opt out of the workforce. I'll quit work. I'll take care of my elderly parents. Warning, opting out has long-term consequences. Are you thinking about opting out of the workforce entirely to become a full-time 24/7 caregiver? While it may seem like a dream, you might want to talk to somebody who is a 24/7 caregiver so that you have a dose of reality. A desire to care for elderly parents 24/7 must be weighed carefully with the idea of opting out of the workforce. While it may be a noble idea, while opting out may be an attractive idea, opting out of the workforce to become a full-time caregiver for an aging parent will have a long-term financial effect on your life, especially if you are a woman, especially if you're the daughter. That long-term effect is difficult to anticipate in the middle of all of the emotions swirling around in those caregiving situations. Let me share a few of the bigger picture concerns. Lower income and lower retirement savings means that women eventually represent the majority of residents in long-term care nursing homes at the end of life. Why? Because family money was spent on the care of a husband. Earnings and savings by women were not sufficient to pay for their care needs. Another reason, men are fact-based and less emotional. They have less insight into the impact of caregiving on daughters and wives when they're gone. They'll be dead. They don't worry about it. They don't think about it. Thus, there are fewer discussions and lack of planning for what happens to wives and daughters who are caregivers. The other point is, husbands don't generally involve their wives in financial planning discussions. They don't involve wives when they go to financial planners. Trust me, financial planners ask. Your husbands, for some reason, say no. They say you're not interested. This includes the idea of buying long-term care insurance to fund the care of a wife. It is a wise investment. Women, if you have not been proactive with financial discussions with your husband, financial discussions with financial planners, now is the time. It is never too early. What to do when work and caregiving collide. This is another podcast. Before you opt out of work to become a 24/7 caregiver, carefully consider the long-term consequences and implications to your own life. More individual about this podcast is in the Caring Generation podcast on my website page, go to media, scroll down to the caring generation, find the show. Another statistic, and this I believe is a Merrill Lynch statistic. Women spend 44% of their lives out of the workforce. Why? They raise children, they care for elderly parents, and they care for a spouse. Versus men. Men are out 28%. So 28% versus 44. Honestly, it's almost 30 compared to 50, according to a Merrill Lynch study. This time out of the workforce places women at a significant financial disadvantage, at a significant disadvantage of having money to pay for your care when you're older, when you need it. This leads us to this discussion of the grass isn't always greener on the other side. How many times do we think that other people have an easier life versus us, or they seem to have it all? These appearances, they are deceiving. Many caregivers report coming to work late, leaving early, or having to take time off to take elderly parents to doctor appointments. As a caregiver, you may take a demotion. You may turn down promotions or change hours to continue working. Your coworkers may not see this. They may think, oh, you have it so easy. Gosh, you get to come in late. Gosh, you get to leave early. They have no idea what you are going through. I always say until becoming a caregiver or needing care happens to you, it's nearly impossible to understand what another person experiences. You might be frustrated with your brothers or sisters who have no idea of everything that you do day in and day out and night in and night out. 24/7 caregivers like your mom or dad easily lose control of a day. Through your participation and becoming more informed about caregiving, you actually are support to your elderly parent who may also be a caregiver. The roles and responsibilities of caregiving, it should be a partnership between elderly parents and adult children, not only the child who is the caregiver, but everyone else in that family. When you think of your elderly parents as being 24/7 caregivers, it really is a difficult job. A memory loss diagnosis and multiple health conditions make being your parent, make being that 24/7 caregiver, a tireless and worrisome job. As a working caregiver, you may already be swept into constant worry, isolation, and depression. Your elderly parent, they're probably already there. Your parent who is the caregiver full-time, they might feel isolated and depressed, no friends, no telephone calls, no social outings. Elderly spouses will be honest. They'll tell me that they feel like they're living in prison. That house where they live and caregiving has become a prison. This means that you are not only caring for your elderly parent with dementia, but you're also caring for your healthy parent, and you're doing double duty. They're doing double duty. Caregiving poses personal cost to health and well-being. Most caregivers, factual, proven by research, become sicker than the persons for whom you care. Illness happens because caregivers neglect their care to care for an elderly parent or spouse. You should be going to doctor appointments. You should be taking care of your health, eating well, exercising, taking time away. You don't. You devote all of that time to being a caregiver. Let's talk about financial costs for caregivers. Caregiving does result in a lot of financial worry. The financial costs for caregivers relate to career opportunities, savings, lost wages, Social Security benefits that affect married caregivers in the sandwich generation who are raising children and trying to do it all. Is that you? Are you in the sandwich generation? While some women have husbands to provide financial support for the household, others do not. There are many single women out there. You may be one of them. Never married, maybe you're divorced, you are a caregiver, maybe you have children and you're the caregiver. Male caregivers are sons who face the same significant stresses because you may feel financially responsible for the care of elderly parents. It's easy for family caregivers to feel embarrassed and guilty when you don't have enough financial resources to help your elderly parents. Difficult decisions may have to be made at those times to place an elderly parent in a nursing home. These are the agonizing realities and the stresses of caregiving that many families will have to face. My own story, and this was from my own family. My mother, her name was Rose. She had a lot of health issues. She would say to us during the time she was sick, which is seriously for about 20 years because of her health issues, but she would always worry about my dad, who was reasonably healthy. And she would say to us, I don't know how I'm going to survive if your father dies. I didn't have a good answer for that. Neither did my brothers and sisters. We kind of thought she was going to live forever. I have no idea what we were thinking. We were naive, didn't know anything about caregiving at the time. This was over 20 years ago before I became a caregiving advocate. Her saying of, I don't know what I'm going to do if your father dies first. She was worried about not having his pension. She was worried about not having his retirement income. And I honestly think that worry led to more health issues for my mom. Talk to your parents about this. Is one parent worried about what happens if the other one dies first? Is there enough money? What I didn't realize at the time that could have been a comfort for my mom, or maybe not, was that the surviving spouse can actually claim the Social Security benefits of the deceased spouse. So let's say that my mom had $500 a month and my dad had $1,000. She could claim to get that $1,000 of benefits. Now, realizing that may not be enough to still maintain the household and pay for her healthcare costs and all of that, these costs are real. These concerns are real, which is why it's important to discuss this with your elderly parents and also think about it for yourself. If you are going to be that surviving caregiver, or if you're 30 years old and you're the caregiver for an elderly parent, what are you doing today to make sure that you are not in that situation when you're older? We'll continue this conversation. Stress and burnout. Caregiving results in stress and burnout for working caregivers. Let's talk about stress and burnout and the emotional aspects of being a caregiver. For paid caregivers, and I say this because spouses work at caregiving 24/7, but you are not paid. The effects of this stress, this burnout for working caregivers, it results in not paying attention at work, being inattentive, not being able to focus on a job because you're thinking about a caregiving to-do list, or you worry about an elderly parent. You have to take time off. There are statistics by the Bureau of Labor Standards that concerns that on average, caregivers spend up to 3 hours a day on caregiving responsibilities. That could mean that you're at work trying to make phone calls to insurance companies, to doctor's offices, you're calling your elderly parents, you're dealing with issues or surrounding caregiving. 3 hours a day, about 20 hours a week, that's a lot of time. How many of you experience that type of challenge today? You may have deadlines at work that you're not meeting. You might have personal things that you should be doing that you're not. You're worried that your coworkers are having to pick up the slack. You're scared to death to say anything about your personal life or being a caregiver to your boss. My advice is to speak up. Don't silently suffer. If you are here as the result of your workplace sponsoring this program, thank them, speak up, tell other caregivers in the workplace you know to engage in programs. If you are here, it's because people want to help. So talk to your supervisor about work schedules, how to make work and caregiving succeed, because opting out really is not a good long-term solution for you or for your employer. Reach out in moments of stress or when you're feeling alone to talk to other caregivers who can empathize with your situation. They exist in caregiving support groups like this. They exist online. They exist in person. So let's talk more about the ongoing financial burden of care. For the most part, you as the family caregiver, you're helping your elderly parents stay at home. You're reducing financial costs for them. As I just mentioned, the average caregiver, 3 hours a day, 20 or more hours a week, helping elderly parents, not just for 1 year, but for 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, sometimes 20 years. Caregiving families, those who are sandwiched caring for elderly parents and children, you have extra challenges. You may have heard the term sandwich generation that I mentioned. This might apply to you if you are in that condition of raising children and caring for elderly parents. So much work. The average costs to care for a parent are in the range of $3,000 a month up to $12,000 a month. So not only are you giving 20 hours a week, 20 times 4, 2 times 4 is 8, 80 hours a month to the care of elderly parents, you're also giving money, $3,000 to $12,000 a month. Because of this, 69% of families actually move a parent into the home. That is a whole nother issue because that causes relationship stress on marriages, on partnerships, and in raising children. Arguments about money, they happen between spouses. Children don't understand why they can't go to Disneyland this year, why money is being spent on the care of grandma and grandpa. These are all the costs that we as a society don't talk about enough. In spousal situations, your mom or dad, the primary caregiver is usually the healthier spouse. Mom may be caring for your dad or vice versa. When you live nearby and you're available, you become the second caregiver for aging parents. When the care exceeds what you, a parent, your brothers or sisters can provide, consider hiring people if you can, a local care manager, in-home caregivers, or looking at a care community. This is not always an option for everybody, which is why retirement planning is so important. Where does all that money go? Oh my gosh. Costs for supporting the care of elderly parents arise in many areas. When an elderly parent doesn't have enough monthly income, you're paying for rent, utilities, groceries, prescriptions, other day-to-day costs, and you continue to do that. And you worry, and then you feel guilty if what happens if you run out of money. As with all of us, unexpected expenses arise. Things like refrigerators break down, the roof leaks, a car needs repairs, we've got medical tests with high copays. Money to pay for care for elderly parents comes from your income, your savings account, the retirement plans of you and your husband. Other types of support exist that are dual in nature. We'll talk about care that benefits the elderly parents and the adult children who are caregivers. This still does cost you, but it may provide some relief. So if you have the money, in-home care agencies, caregivers from agencies, they're called companion agencies or home health, they come into the home. They provide a wide variety of assistance from medication reminding, bathing, meal preparation, running errands, depending on where you live. $15 to $30 an hour. You can also decide to hire independently. That's a whole nother discussion that involves your CPA and taxes and how much time you want to spend managing that care situation. What is a care manager? A care manager is like having a personal assistant. I was a care manager for many years. We manage all aspects of care for loved ones. We provide significant relief in situations where you do have the money to pay for care, either privately or through long-term care insurance programs. Care managers and our staff, we manage the care needs of a loved one. We report the results to you. We attend doctor appointments, manage prescription drugs, exercise, meals, you name it, we do it. The availability of care managers, it's not well known. And the availability of in-home caregivers may be a little more well known. Care managers are professionals who have the education and specialized expertise. I have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree. I'm a certified guardian. I'm a certified senior advisor. Care managers manage all aspects of care when family members are not available or you don't have the time or you want a second opinion. You want the experience of someone who does this day in and day out. On average, though, an experienced care manager or staff, the cost is $75 to $150 an hour. It can be a trade-off. Why use a care manager? Here are the benefits. And again, I repeat this, but an experienced care manager, can save you time, money, worry, and improve the care that your loved one receives. Again, save you time, money, worry, and improve the care that your loved one receives. The time and money savings come in when you have the choice of investigating and vetting outside services yourself, providing the care yourself that may interrupt your ability to work, when you make mistakes because you're exhausted, or you have do-overs because somebody else gave you bad information and you didn't verify it. The way that I explain the benefit of a care manager is by looking at other professions, because care management really is a profession. If you have a complicated tax return, do you do the return yourself or do you use a CPA? Do you do all of the repairs on your car or you take it to a mechanic that you trust? If you have money that you want to invest, do you spend the time researching and investing, or do you go to a financial advisor? There's a degree of education and experience that care managers possess through the connections that they have in the aging and care industries, through their education, through their experiences. Where do you find these people? You can find care managers through local recommendations from the Department of Aging or Social Services, or you can search for someone at the website called guardianship.org. I do recommend interviewing several care managers, ask for references, ask for their experience in situations similar to yours, and then make the best choice. Other care options, day programs. Day programs are a less expensive alternative to in-home care services. A day program involves taking an elderly parent to a day center and picking them up in the evening, or you might be able to use a transportation service. A day program is similar to the idea of childcare. Depending on where you live, they may have day programs, they may not. The cost of an adult day program, $50 to $100 a day or a little more. The benefits, it's less cost than an in-home caregiver at about 3 hours. The challenges are just like when starting daycare with a child. An elderly parent may tell you they do not want to go, they are not going, they may throw a tantrum. It's also important to find a day program that is a good match for your elderly parent's cognition and physical abilities. More options, assisted living and memory care centers. Beyond daycare are care communities that offer assisted living and memory care. Depending on the level of memory loss and physical ability, an assisted living memory care may be an option. There are also full-blown memory care units that are much like nursing homes. Assisted living memory care provides support with all activities of daily living, bathing, dressing, eating, toileting, transferring, just like you do as a spouse or an adult child. As a family caregiver, though, you still have to visit. You have to show up to ensure that good care is provided. The average cost, $3,000 to $10,000 a month, sometimes more, depending on the care level of your elderly parent. Have early conversations. Talk to elderly parents to see if paying for assisted living will ever be a possibility, how long they might be able to pay for $3,000 to $10,000 a month, so that you can plan for the idea that, what do we do if money runs out? We've talked about who keeps elderly parents at home. The primary person that keeps a spouse out of a nursing home is the healthier spouse. In lieu of a healthier spouse, or at the same time, the second person, guess who? It's you if you are the daughter. The relationship and attachments between mothers and daughters are significant and come into play when people need care. For your parents, the wife, your mother, reduces the likelihood of nursing home placement for your father if your mom's healthy enough to be that caregiver. However, the reverse, not true. For women, having a husband does not reduce the likelihood of nursing home placement. Again, very important for you to know, for planning years ahead for your care. If you're married and you don't have children, you cannot rely on your husband. Studies report that having children, though, have a greater effect on reducing the likelihood of nursing home placement for a mother who even has a husband. The truth is, wives are the main caregivers. Women are the main caregivers for husbands who are usually older and not in as good of health. Husbands will place wives in nursing homes because of being physically unable to provide care. More commonly, when adult children are not available to provide support. If adult children are available, it may be possible to keep mom at home longer. Statistics show, and you may be experiencing this, that more family stress occurs when you're doing personal care tasks. So bathing, dressing, taking blood pressures, blood sugars, changing ostomies, changing depends, all of that care. And when extended care tasks are happening, doesn't matter if it's a daughter, a father, a son, these situations are very emotionally stressful. So let's talk about nursing homes, which none of us want to talk about, but sometimes they do become inevitable. Helping an elderly parent who has memory loss stay home may eventually turn into an impossible situation. Lack of sleep for the caregiver, physical weakness, fall risks, greater medical care, incontinence, having to do medical tasks, and having to manage behaviors all contribute to a family decision to move a loved one to a care community. Skilled nursing, called rehabilitation centers and nursing homes, $250 to over $500 a day, depending on where you live. Most families can't pay for this indefinitely. The cost of memory care and nursing homes are the reasons that you must investigate long-term care insurance long before it's needed, state Medicaid programs 1 to 2 years before the money runs out. Let's talk for a minute about this financial planning. What do you do when the money runs out? In looking at the costs of care for a parent, identify the care needed today. What are the daily costs? Look at the threshold for the next level of care. Is that hiring a care manager? Is that bringing in-home care? Create a household budget. Determine if there are other family members that can contribute to the cost of care. Then again, look at the thresholds. For example, if your elderly parent attends a day program 5 days a week at a cost of $500 a day, that's $2,000 a month. If more care is needed, do you supplement with an in-home caregiver, or do you start looking at assisted living? If the money runs out, what are the options? Does money exist? Looking at these costs and planning 1 to 2 years ahead, cannot stress it enough, 1 to 2 years ahead, is important to avoid feeling stuck by having to make an immediate decision because of an emergency or a crisis. Talk about memory care, talk about money, the costs of care long before costs increase. When there's no money to pay for care, the public program of Medicaid is usually the go-to program for many families. Contact your local county social service department well in advance of the need, just to learn more about the financial requirements, the health requirements, and the paperwork. 1 to 2 years in advance. Start looking at communities who have openings and the time it takes to process an application. It can take months. It can take 1 month, 6 months, sometimes up to a year. If your parents were veterans, the Veterans Administration also has a program for wartime veterans that help with in-home care and other costs. Contact a VA service officer to learn more. 2 podcasts that I have that go into these subjects extensively are What is Assisted Living? The other is Costs of Caring for Elderly Parents. Throughout this section, you've heard me repeat recommendations to plan early, to initiate family discussions about money. Planning and initiating discussions, it is the path forward to reduce stress, anxiety, guilt, and worry. Set a date on your calendar today, 1 week into the future, 1 month in the future. Have these conversations with elderly parents and yourselves. Let's summarize what we talked about. The hard and the personal costs of caring for elderly parents increase as health declines increase and more care is needed. Working caregivers struggle. You struggle to do your jobs, and you struggle to pay for and supplement the incomes of your elderly parents. That struggle to pay for care results in a need for honest care conversations early that are difficult to have but necessary. Unexpected situations can arise in not having enough money to pay for care costs. Elderly parents in many situations don't want to be a burden to their children. By talking about these hard costs and the needs for you to remain working, both sides can feel heard. You can have the difficult conversations and make a plan. As we discussed, talk early, talk often, make plans for elderly parents and for yourselves. You will need care to pay for yourselves when you are older. Your care needs will affect your elderly children and other people in your family. Regardless of a diagnosis of memory loss or not, these discussions are so essential. They are so necessary. I thank you for joining me for this segment. I know it's a difficult subject to discuss. I know money is difficult to talk about, especially if you don't have enough or you're worried about having to leave work to care for an elderly parent, or even just how your parents will receive care. Money and finances result in a lot of emotional distress for caregivers. You can avoid that distress, again, by pulling out your calendar, setting a date, have the conversation, as difficult as it may be. It will reduce stress and worry for you and probably for your elderly parent. I'm Pamela D Wilson, caregiving expert, advocate, and speaker. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar. I'll see you in the next webinar.